YouTube. So first of all, good morning, everyone, to our Dix Leadership Meeting. Our Mayor Baldwin is on her way. Just a computer issue. We're going to go ahead and start our meeting. There's a lot to cover today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kate to start with our first presentation.
Great, thanks so much. There are a couple of housekeeping items. So Mike, if you will see if we've got anyone online for public comment, that would be great.
Sure thing. Any of you who joined in from the public that would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and I'll ask you to unmute yourself. We'll give it a second here to see if anyone does. I don't see any hands raised, so I think we're okay to proceed.
Yeah, sorry about that, Kate. I was trying to get us going. Do we have any minutes? Do we have our minutes from our last meeting?
We do.
All right, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? They're okay. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes? Because I believe we do have quorum.
Mr. Chairman, this is David. If I move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion made by David Smith to approve, second by Horace Quarles. Any unreadiness? If not, all in favor, just raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Having none, not hearing any, that passes unanimously. And Mayor, I will pass this back off to you. We just approved the minutes.
Thank you, Corey. Appreciate that. Sorry, everyone, having some computer issues this morning. Love technology when it works. Okay, we approved the minutes. Now we're on to the community committee report.
Thank you, Mayor. Very quickly, we're excited to share that we kicked off our 2022 last week with resuming our meetings, which will be quarterly. And Kate, Nick, and the team and I have worked to kind of figure out how to really re-engage this group moving forward after really having this time apart. It's been really challenging to have a community committee that's virtual, as you all know and can understand. So we have identified 3 areas to focus on for 2022. Of course, the Parks Bond is one. The second one is the cultural interpretation of the plan for the park, and then a partnership study, which will focus on who will hopefully be entertaining space at the park moving forward. The other thing to note is that the membership was renewed for its next appointment. So we're around 38 members. If Nick or Kate want to correct me, please do so. And that's where we are. So we're excited. One of the other things that we're discussing is how we would have community conversations to assist with these different areas, to continue to be a liaison with the Conservancy and the city and to the community at large, and to be helpful. And so stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Shauna, for that update. And you're right, it's hard to have a community committee in COVID, doing everything virtual. Hopefully, we will start getting beyond this, seeing the bell curve come down, and we can get back together again. Okay, Anchor Institution Feasibility Study update.
Great, thank you, Mayor, and welcome to everyone on the call. Before I hand this over to Michael Van Valkenburg Associates, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context of where we are today. So the city and the Marbles staff has been engaging in conversations about potential relocation of Marbles to the Dix Park site. And as an initial step in understanding the possibility of a relocation, we wanted to work with our consultants to really look at the site's physical ability to support an institution like Marbles. So the feasibility study, which you're going to hear the initial presentation on this morning, really is evaluating the park's physical, so topography, location, view corridors, and infrastructure, roads, utilities, parking, capacity to support an anchor institution. It has been a quick start study. It was a critical moment in the design of the Play Plaza to go ahead and get this study underway, with the understanding that there is going to be a much larger study that's going to be evaluating all of the buildings and as Shauna mentioned, future potential tenants as part of the next phase of the building and infrastructure analysis. So this was kind of a quick start into that conversation, and the findings really will inform discussions on the next steps with Marbles, but also inform the next phase of building and infrastructure work. So with that context, I'd like to turn it over to MBBA and Hillary, your team, to start the presentation.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Matt Urbanski should be joining us soon, so I will lead us off. But when he joins, I'm sure he'll like to say a few words. So just to jump right in, because I know we're limited time and I have a full agenda today, we are going to spend some time with you reviewing Marbles expansion goals as the basis of our study. As Kate mentioned, we're also going to review the site planning criteria for locating an anchor institution in Dix Park, look at the opportunities and constraints as objectively as possible of the existing conditions and how they can receive Marbles expansion goals, look at the suitability of a number of different sites. There's 4 different sites for Marbles to be relocated to Dix Park, and then discuss parking demands. As you'll see, it's quite a big component of this study. But first, I just want to say that we had back in July at our 3rd public meeting for Plaza Play, we had the opportunity and the honor of getting a full-blown tour of the Marbles facilities with Sally. And it was an absolutely fun day. There were some highs and lows. I think Kate got stung by a hornet's nest, but we just had a really in-depth look at this space, this resource for the community and what it could be to bring to Dix Park. And so we were excited and beyond thrilled when we learned that they were relocating and looking to be close to Play Plaza. So that was the sort of foundation for starting our planning criteria, is having that foundation and understanding and experience of the Marbles Museum. So for those who don't know, Marbles is located in the Pink area in downtown Raleigh. It's very close to Play Plaza and Dorothea Dix Park. You can see the size of Marbles related to Dix Park. And just as a reminder—
Hey, Hillary, real quick, I see Sally put her hand up and I bet I know what she's going to say, but Sally, please go ahead.
Yeah, we've been working together enough, Kate, that you probably do. Good morning, everybody. Sally Edwards with Marbles. And Hillary, thanks for the nice introduction and sharing that fun day we had. I did want to just one point of context with all the people who are on this call. The comment about thrilled to learn that Marbles is relocating. That decision certainly hasn't been made. As Kate said, the purpose of this study really is to inform so many future decisions, discussions, and next steps. So that's really where we are. We're not at a point yet as an institution that we have made a decision to relocate, but it is certainly worthy of consideration.
Thank you, Sally. That's such an important clarification. So when we look at the master plan, it's always a really great foundation and reminder for the guiding principles for all of the work and all of the projects to come, building from what is here, opening up and connecting and offering something for everybody. And then, of course, Play Plaza, which is in full development, moving into construction documents, absolutely an ideal site for us to begin to think about locations for where Marbles could potentially relocate. So the big overarching question is, how can a new cultural institution such as Marbles in the park become the most compatible and supportive of both the Dix Park Master Plan and the Play Plaza? How can we find synergies, mutual benefits for all? And it's really about, the answer is really a balance of these three things, which is the foundation of our study. Balancing Marble's expansion goals with access and parking impacts and the site planning criteria. So just to dive into those three components a little bit more in detail, the expansion goals we learned from Marble's incorporate three main elements. So their new expansion is intended to be a space for new exhibits, new programs and events, as well as the logistics that keep all of those elements functioning. The goal is for 1 million annual visitors by 2030. So a similar goal for Play Plaza. And their expansion, and this is really key, is to include 100,000 square feet of interior space, as well as outdoor areas for expanded learning and development opportunities for children. So then the other element, the second element of the three, is our site evaluation criteria. And this was really important to develop, not just for Marbles, but in general when locating an institution at Dix Park. And as Kate mentioned, there's a few components to this, such as location, access, being safe and easy to use for all modes of transportation, positive impacts on park functions, and compatible with parking demand. So we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail. Program, expanding Dix Park visitors with new programs through Marbles sponsored events, or there could be a number of opportunities there, but also supporting the park's financial needs. Architecture, we're going to take a look at all of the buildings on the site. Is there potential to preserve the architecture of these buildings, or is it worth exploring demoing them and starting fresh while keeping in mind the historical significance? And then, of course, implementation. What's feasible? What's constructible? How do we build from what is there? Low impact to the mature trees, zoning requirements and considerations, and then, of course, stormwater impacts, which is the second part of the study that we will be presenting to you the second time we meet with you. So the main thing on this slide is to point out the location and proximity of the campus to Play Plaza. So you can see these rings represent minutes of walking. So the interior circle is 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes. We really tried to locate sites for Marbles within the 5-minute walking radius to Play Plaza. And so we identified 4 potential sites. They're referred to A through D. But the main point, and this is something that if Matt's on, he can elaborate on, but as you'll notice, the square footage of existing buildings highlighted in pink are, around 15,000, 30,000, as low as 7,000. The average size of the buildings on the site is 20,000 square feet. So we're working with inherited buildings that are quite small in comparison to the program that we understood Marbles needed for their expansion. We've been fortunate to work with VHB traffic engineers, and they have helped us understand what are the access opportunities and constraints with these 4 different sites. What are the topography, site conditions that may make it more difficult for people who are traveling by foot or bike to get to the different sites. And what we ultimately see is that Site A, which we're going to spend some more time on, A and C are located along Lakewheeler Road. And these sites are predominantly flat, and they're also adjacent to a number of existing and proposed or potential bus stops. So these sites A and C are what we would consider prime for siting an institution like Marbles. Site B and D, which are more interior to the park, have longer distances to travel, further away from bus stop locations, and a little bit more rugged terrain in terms of getting there. We look at parking. When we did the master plan, we spent a lot of work trying to identify locations for parking areas for park support. As you can see, these different areas provide certain number of spaces for park users. The Play Plaza has about 150 spaces. The master plan also held, you can see, additional 375 spaces near what would be the amphitheater, 300 spaces in the hub, and then additional 375 spaces towards the railroad. And this was, again, recommended for park uses only. We've done studies with VHB and Marbles that their preliminary parking analysis reveals the need for 300 to 500 spaces dedicated for Marbles. So one of the challenges of the study has been looking for ways to have synergy in terms of parking. So we'll talk more about that in the discussion. So this study, this slide shows the results of that study. For peak attendance, about, as I said, 246 or 300 spaces for visitors and employees. And then anticipated growth on the right side at about 500 spaces. So this slide concludes the section that I'm going to speak about. We will come back to this once we've dived into the different massing studies, which we're very excited to share with you. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick Hobgood of Hobgood Architects. Patrick, take it from here.
Okay. Hey everybody. Thanks, Hillary. Patrick Hobgood from Hobgood Architects. This is David G. We've been working on this for quite a little while to see where an institution of this scale could kind of comfortably fit into the Dix Park master plan. This is the kind of current Marbles breakdown of the kind of programmed areas and then their future growth. I think the kind of two important things here to take out, you know, we talk about 100,000 square feet of new exhibition space and program. That's kind of the raw square footage. Depending on what type of program, you know, we're adding a circulation multiplier 1.3. Sometimes museums get up to 1.6, 1.7. So our studies are looking at a building of 140,000 square feet, but it could very easily be, you know, closer to 170,000 net square feet. And then the other thing I'd just pull out really quick is the admin program, which is about, say 10,000 square feet. And also maybe classroom education is about 20. So maybe that's about 30,000 square feet. And I mention that because some of the schemes we look at attached to existing buildings. So to see how that 30,000 could be reused. Obviously this was mentioned by Hillary, but you know,
well, the fact that the tree can come down and there's no legal.
Hey, David, we're going to mute you real quick.
So we've looked at this, all of these sites with 300 spaces, with 500 spaces. We're going to show you 500 spaces. You know, it's another basically aisle of parking as an impact on the site as well to go with the kind of architectural programming. So next slide. And then these are kind of like, just to, obviously no one's claiming or pursuing surface parking everywhere, but that big pink box that's outlined, that's if it was all surface parking. So 500 spaces is about the size of Plaza and Play on the surface. And then the studies on the right, you can just see as you start to go to a structured deck, you know, how much more efficient the footprint becomes. For the museum, they asked for 16 feet clear, so we have a 20-foot floor to floor. Most of the time, we try to limit the massing to 2 stories. It's about 40 feet. There's some 3-story options, so then you're approaching 60 feet vertically. And then the parking, the structured decks are 8 feet clear, 10 feet floor to floor. So about 2 levels of parking per level of museum. And you'll see that in pink and purple in the studies. And then these are by no means meant to, this is just very generalized, the cost of parking. Let's say, surface parking is very affordable. Structured decks get a little bit, start to increase significantly, about $20,000 a space. And then when you go underground, depending on how deep you're going and piping in air or other conditions, those can be upwards of $70,000 a space. So we're mostly focusing on the structured decks because surface is kind of ruled out, and we think underground is just going to be too much impact on the construction budget. Okay, so these are the 4 sites that Hillary mentioned that we looked at. We're going to kind of work from further into, I think we go B, D, C, A. So we kind of, the sites get better progressively, or let's say more feasible as we work towards the end. Site D is up here on the ridge. Yeah, that's fine. You can go to the next one. So here we are kind of in the heart of the master plan. We just have one option up here. We looked at a number, but how to thread in 140,000 square foot building into this kind of already densely packed top of the site was a little bit challenging. We have the McBride building. McBride South is potentially one that we could reuse. That's about 20,000 square feet. And when I say reuse, a lot of these existing buildings aren't obviously built for exhibition space. So that's why when we consider the existing buildings, we're looking at admin space, possibly classrooms, some of the education programming that could be inserted in that floor to ceiling height. So these are the kind of architectural, let's say, context that we'd be inserting into. And then what we looked at was a way to kind of use the negative space up there on the ridge to kind of to put a 3-story new marbles. It could attach to the trellis walk. And then the bright green square that you will always see in these schemes is the 25,000 square feet of exterior space that Marbles would like to use in the future. So this one kind of attaches to the loop. It has a close proximity to existing parking. What we couldn't accommodate on this site was a new parking strategy. So we talked about ways of increasing the parking. That's just to the southwest of this site, but that was the most challenging thing on this site. It's the only one that we couldn't figure out how to do a structured deck. This is a kind of views looking at it to see the mass of that. So that's a 60-foot tall building. Okay, now we go to site C, which is down here on Lakewheeler Road. So we have the Duke Power easement to kind of, that's why this angle is being introduced here. The easement for their transformers. And then we had two existing buildings on this site that we looked at. One was Graham, which architecturally we didn't really think was very significant and could easily be demoed. And then Taylor, which I think could be kept or could be demoed. We have schemes where we kept it, but what we'll show you is 2 schemes where we demo both buildings. This is the existing character of those 2 buildings. And the first one, what we tried to do here is to preserve the view corridor into the Grove. So coming up from Lakewheeler, that's what that kind of large arrow is on the top left-hand image. And then this is the tallest kind of museum. It's a 4-story structure. Could be tucked into the existing slope a little bit. So maybe it's 3.5 stories with an adjacent parking structured deck. Maybe go to the next slide, Hillary. We have, this is the view kind of from Lakewheeler. You can see McBride in the background, a view in the bottom left from the park, kind of looking back. This adjacent deck, the roof of that parking garage could be another outdoor space. We actually had 25,000 square feet of Marbles exterior space in the park. If you go back one real quick, Hillary, I'll just point that out. And that's up here. So Plaza and Plays to the west of that, to the left-hand side of that top left image. And that's kind of, great access off Lakewheeler. And the same site, we tried to kind of compress this footprint a little bit more. This is, I'd say, a little bit atypical for a museum typology to stack the galleries on top of the parking. A portion of this building would need to come down and touch the ground, to service escalators and elevators up to the gallery spaces. This was just to kind of minimize an attempt to minimize the footprint and impact on the park. And again, the 25,000 square feet of exterior space kind of attaches into the park. So it gets a bit taller when you stack it, obviously. But we try to keep it to Lakewheeler. We know that there's some large scale development coming across the street. So we felt like this would be the one site you could go a little bit taller. Okay, then now we're up at site B. So this is the furthest away from Plaza and Play. But there were some existing buildings that was quite nice. We have Lineberger up here, which is about 25,000 square feet. So we thought this could potentially house, if there's a new construction that attaches to this existing building, a lot of the admin and classroom program could possibly be reworked into Lineberger. So we have a slightly smaller building footprint now. It's 3 stories. We're close to the train tracks, but you can see how the 25,000 square feet of exterior space could connect to the existing courtyard of Lineberger, could wrap around the front. And we have a 5-story parking deck here. I would say this site's probably the most challenging in terms, we have this CXX rail line. They have their own kind of stipulations building adjacent to them. So I know it can be kind of difficult, especially if you go underground at all. And in reality, this massing should be flipped. Apologies that the building really should be on the face of this, and the parking on the rail side. So this is a 3-story structure, a museum structure, and how that kind of could sit and peek up above Lineberger from some views and be tucked in. The biggest exposed views, I'd say, are work well in terms of massing on this site. Okay, so now we're at site A, which is really kind of a prime site. We have 3 options we can show you guys here. Some try to keep existing buildings and some look at new construction. So if we look at what we have here, we have Clark, Broughton, and Brown. Brown is always a great building that we're looking at how that could service the Plaza and Play. Clark and Broughton certainly could be kept. They're like a story and a half with a large basement that's kind of tucked into the slope of the site. 12-foot ceilings to 9-foot ceilings in these. A lot of these were kind of dormitories in a previous use. So if we go to the next one. So the first one just looks at how the museum could kind of connect to Brown and, is it Clark? It's Clark. So we could start to take advantage of some of the existing buildings, making kind of smaller courtyards, and have the museum or this new marbles kind of fill in between 2 existing buildings and be able to attach to them. The massing does need to go up to about 2.5 stories, let's say, but this is a first pass. We could put lower programs on the roof level if needed to maintain that scale. But you'd have a 40-story building and some views, and then on the backside, you'd see the full height, the 60 feet on the backside. So then we just looked at combining Broughton and Clark so that this building could become like a new entry piece. It's a 2-story structure in between, and then trying to reuse the existing courtyards that are there. Some of this is these funny little cuts on the backside is from the adjacent healing transition site. And then this one, we just looked at a structured deck of 500 cars that could be, it's a 3-story deck, but because there's a significant slope from, let's say, the existing buildings down to the west, it drops quite a bit, that we could tuck a portion of that into the ground. So it's just a way of kind of hiding a lot of the scale of that structured deck. If you go to the next slide, this is a similar strategy, but now we're wrapping the kind of museum program around the deck. So we think this kind of works really well in terms of for parking for the museum. It's direct kind of access to all the levels. It cloaks the impact of a large structured deck in the park as much as possible. And I think, we also tuck it into the site. So if you see up by the Brown building, that's a 20-story, that's 20 feet here. So just one single story. And as the slope drops away, it gets 2 full stories exposed. A nice feature here is that you, of course, have ample entry kind of courtyard. You have the potential to make an upper level courtyard that's shared with the Brown building. And then on the lower level of the site, that kind of ground floor or B1 could spill out to another courtyard. So you get courtyards at kind of multiple levels or exterior spaces. and you're a stone's throw from Plaza and Play. So,
Hey, Patrick, it's Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, how are you?
Good,
Hi,
thanks.
everyone. Sorry for butting in right now. I just want to say that this was a solution that, lots of times the good solution seems like, well, why didn't they just think of that at first? And that's usually a good sign. It seems obvious. And don't you think, Patrick? I mean, this one we came up with last after we explored every awful option there was. In a way, it had to do with overcoming the phobia of demolishing the old buildings. But what you saw, I mean, there's the big challenge, of course, this building is that it's a lot bigger than the building. We have a lot of buildings on the site, but none of them are really that big. And so a scale issue comes up. And this is not just marbles. This is like modern buildings are just bigger than old buildings. I mean, one of the cute reasons why old buildings were narrow is because they were letting light in, because they took advantage of natural light more than we do with big buildings. But also programs are just bigger, and the marbles has a big interior program. And then they also have a need for a lot of parking. And what we found here was once we got over taking out the buildings, which don't look good being saved, the schemes where we saved them, they just look overwhelmed by the mass of the new building. By doing this, we ironically, I think, work better with the existing building here and the existing scale of the landscape. It's just, and also we found a way, and I'm sure you covered this already, Patrick, but we found a way to do affordable parking in a good way. Because the nicest parking is basically stupidly expensive and never going to happen, which is underground parking. It's just not going to happen. It's just too expensive in such a vast landscape. And so structured parking above ground is the only reasonable way to think about it. But then a parking structure in the park is not so great. And so how do we do that? And the way Patrick so skillfully wrapped this here, and of course, this is just a very quick massing study, but still it's got a lot of wisdom in it. And it wraps the structure. It addresses the scale of Brown, but it also addresses the scale of the road where it faces out towards Lakewheeler. You could imagine a beautiful, maybe contemporary facade on that side that has the scale that you need to read it from Lakewheeler. It's appropriate from Lakewheeler. So it's got the scale relationships it needs on all the different sides. Do you think I got that right, Patrick?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Can you go to the next slide, Hillary? I think it's got the views. Yeah, so Lakewheeler is the bottom left view looking up. This is also kind of the entry to the Plaza and Play. And then up on the top image, you'll see it with the Brown building, so now the heights are very kind of comparable.
Right.
It doesn't overwhelm at all. And like Matt said, this is very crude. I mean, with a good architect, you can break the scale down even further by undulating the facade, by staggering elements. So I think you could, by far, if we looked at 50 options, this for us was the most promising option, the one that was kind of most exciting for the team. The rest, like Matt said, we also kind of challenge connecting to existing buildings. That construction can be quite costly. And those buildings, you're going to spend so much money to try to reuse them. And if they're not really architecturally significant, we just question that logic. So I think the new construction is probably the most economical, or let's say programmatically efficient, to get the new institution just how Sally would want it.
The other thing that's not shown here is there's a mass, a really huge, really significant mass of pine trees also between Healing Transitions and this. And that, I think the scale of that landscape element is also another thing that I think brings this into scale nicely here.
So that's a kind of a recap of those 3 sites, trying to attach to different pairs of buildings versus demoing Clark and Broughton and just having a new site, new construction here.
And I want to make sure we have time for discussion. So I think this might be one of the summary slides, but Hillary, if we can get to discussion quickly, that would be great.
I was just going to hand it over to that. So I will stop screen sharing, but I can pull up slides if anyone needs visuals back.
And just for context, this is the first time, obviously, you're seeing a lot of this information. Sally's team and the city's team, along with MBBA and Hopkins, have been working on this for a number of weeks now. And so I think the discussion here really is around your initial reactions to a lot of the criteria and some of the things that you've seen. Know that we will then come back to you at a future meeting, but wanted to get some of these initial thoughts and ideas out in front of this group for discussion.
Okay. If you have a question, if you could just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Jen was first, Jen Wagner.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a couple comments. I think it's really great work and interesting. Thanks for the thought that was put into it to the team. One is with the site that was right along Lakewheeler Road. I think that I would just worry a little bit about traffic backups and just something to kind of consider. And I'm sure you've thought through that some getting into the deck. Another just sort of bigger question is there a possibility to share parking at all? You know, you've talked about Marbles needing the additional 300 to 500 spaces, but is all that parking within the park always going to be full? You know, is that more event parking? So it'd be nice if we could find some sort of shared opportunity. And then with the last scheme with Clark and Broughton being raised, I was just curious, you mentioned that they may not have that much architectural significance. Is that what came out of the building infrastructure study when that was done? What was determined with those buildings at that time? That's all, thank you.
I can answer your,
Okay,
so go ahead.
Kate, if you want to go.
Yeah, I can answer that last question, Jen. So the upcoming study, we haven't actually finished the building and infrastructure study yet, so we're about to do that. But out of the master plan, this was always an area for future inquiry. So it was never determined what should happen in this area. So I think that's this next level of analysis. I will note, though, that those buildings are within the National Register Historic District, but that doesn't really have, being within a district has a different level of criteria for use or demo than being like a landmark itself. So more inquiry needed, but in the master plan, this whole area was always identified as future study area.
Don, could you help us with the parking question?
Sure. Yeah, there is some possibility for shared parking. We looked at that. I think that's something we would drill down into a little more. Play Plaza and Marbles have some similar, it's not the ideal, ideally you'd have something where there was like movie theaters are ideal. There's a lot of parking demand at night and weekends, and you can use it for other things during the week. These are pretty similar, but it's kind of interesting. For example, we're thinking when the weather's nice, there'd be more people at the Plaza and fewer people at Marbles. When the weather's bad, it would kind of go the other way. There might be some instances where people go to Marbles and then go over to the Play Plaza. So there is some opportunity, not huge because they are so similar in their demand patterns, but that's definitely potential, especially if it's located in the right place.
Generally, I'll just say the truth that nobody wants to say. Most people think we don't have enough parking in the park already, except for the few people who don't want any at all, which are totally unrealistic. So that's just something to consider without Marbles at all, okay? And we did a lot of careful study about how to integrate parking into the landscape in the master plan.
Okay, Sally was next and then Nancy McFarland. So Sally, you had your hand raised next.
I did. Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of comments. First, a great deal of work. And as Kate said, we've been working together for several weeks. So emphasis on weeks, not months. This was a really quick study. So thank you to the city and to NBVA for making that happen. That said, I just wanted to also clarify that because it was an accelerated study to align with the timeline of Plaza Play, everything that Marbles has put into the study from a lot of years of planning was for our current site downtown. So these numbers, parking numbers, growth numbers are not yet at all factoring in any synergies that could come from being located next to Plaza Play. So we do know that while people use these, there are a lot of the same people who are going to flock to Plaza Play who flock to Marbles. And so there's a real opportunity there. Certainly hasn't been the time yet to evaluate how those synergies might impact scale and scope of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait, one more thing, Mayor. Can I say one more thing? And the other thing is that to Patrick's point that with, and thanks to Hobgood and VHB as well, that we're looking at crude massing of squares, right? I mean, we're in the imagination business. And so it's also for all of us with Marbles helping bring that to Raleigh. When you see the brown building and where it is in Plaza Play, and we can just kind of close our eyes and imagine that if this were to move forward, it would not be a big rectangle.
Clearly.
Thank
How about
you.
purple, Sally? You want it to be purple?
Well, I mean, you know, there might be some purple.
There might be.
Nancy.
I've one comment and one question, and the comment is in regards to the parking and the shared parking, sort of projecting out, you know, after this, we're going to be putting an amphitheater right on the other side of kind of where Broughton and Clark are.
Right.
So I think that, you know, certainly that will probably tend to be more night performances, which might balance out and lend to some share. But I just want us to be thinking past just these two, because it's going to be an issue the more and more we do. The other question I have is, you've mentioned a couple times that you needed 25,000 square feet of outdoor space. I'm not sure what we have 300 acres. What's the 25,000 square feet of outdoor space for?
Yeah, so that in particular was one of the things I was referencing, where the numbers that came from Marbles and our goals were based on where that ideally what would be an expansion. So that was my point about adjacencies and potential synergies.
Are you saying that you want that space reserved for potential expansion?
No, it wouldn't. That the 25,000 square feet is ideal for a program for Marbles expansion. It absolutely could take advantage of adjacencies within the park. Could be shared space. Yeah.
Okay.
Nancy, I'll just say for Sally's sake that, you know, a lot of the landscape that a facility like Sally's has is highly programmed, and and it's fitted out. And so that doesn't mean she needs to do that here, but using the park, you could say they have a bird watching program that's connected to some ecology education or something, and that's just using the park, right? That's just like they have some of their docents out there guiding a tour or something like that. On the other hand, they might have a garden, or they might have a water hydrodynamic display or something, or they might have, you know, a display about ants or something, and that has like a built-in feature to it. And in that case, you might want a dedicated spot. And I think those are just the things that we're trying to balance out and think about. And some of that kind of stuff could be interesting features in that courtyard between Brown and the building, possibly, right, Sally?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most attractive factors that makes this worthy of consideration is the adjacencies and the sharing of space and the synergies created. So absolutely. I mean, right now, looking at absolute figures that come from data and research, but that could all certainly be massaged. And it's one of the benefits as they were looking at A, B, C, and D, as well as where is where are we going to maximize these synergies by co-locating the Marbles program and the Plaza Play.
Thank you. Blount?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm reiterating one point that's been focused on, and that is the parking. I think we make a mistake if we discuss the parking as being dedicated to Marbles and what Marbles' specific needs are. I think there's consensus that the park needs more parking and that the parking should be oriented in a way that it can accommodate all kinds of different activities that may occur at the park and not just visitors to Marbles. And I think the plan, the preferred location seems really reasonable. I think there's a little bit of awkwardness in having structured parking next door to a surface parking lot. And I'm just wondering why that wasn't more connected and related differently. And then last, just a personal comment. I agree with Patrick that construction is much more economical if it's a new building. But I think we really lose a story of restoration, renovation, celebration of the past of what exists at at Dix, if we eliminate those two buildings to build a new structure. I can certainly rally around that, but I think we lose a big component of our story for the community to rally around this kind of a anchor location in the park. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, could I just say something to what Blunt's
yes, please. And then we're going to start wrapping up.
Oh, okay. I don't want to drag it out too long, but Patrick, I mean, you guys did show the challenges that come out of saving these pieces. It sounds better than it looks, is what I want to say.
Yeah.
It sounds about 10 times better than it looks, because I really was hooked on the narrative myself about the story of restoration. And of course, you could make it work, but you're starting to get into major dollars, I think is one of the challenges, because you could push more of the Marbles program down into the ground next to some of those things, right? For instance, Patrick?
Yep. Yeah,
But
there was an issue of those are kind of dormitories, so that they're double loaded corridors with 10-foot deep cells on both sides. You could get office use out of those, maybe classrooms if you go to a single loaded corridor, but the existing footprints are just challenging to use beyond admin and classroom programs.
Right.
So Kate, you said this is going to be coming back to us at a future date. I really appreciated the creativity that went into this. And, you know, when I look at this collectively with the opportunity for so much shared space and shared parking, I really like the idea of the building that is 2 stories with wraparound parking, because it reduces the impact, but still accommodates all the needs. And so I just want to provide that bit of feedback, and I'm sure others will have feedback for Kate and whatnot. But I think this is really exciting, and I just want to thank everybody for the quick work that has been done on this. So thank you. Next, we have the Lakewheeler Road update.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And we have a whole cast of city staff here to walk through a presentation on Lakewheeler Road. And just as a reminder, we've been asked a lot of questions about Lakewheeler Road in terms of where we are, capacity assumptions, what is the results of the Dix Edge study, what's happening with the development adjacent to the park and the traffic impacts there. What does Play Plaza and Marbles traffic generation look and its impact on Lakewheeler Road? What's our design and construction schedule? What about our construction delivery methods? There's just been a lot of questions surrounding the Lakewheeler Road project. And so we've brought together everyone who's involved to answer those questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael Moore. He's our Director of Transportation. And Michael, I'm happy to advance slides for you if you want to take it from here.
Well, thank you, Kate. And good morning, everybody. It's good to be back with you again today. We're going to run through, you can read this for yourself, but we're going to run through a number of things here. But just to refresh everyone's memory, just a quick slide about Lakewheeler Road what we're talking about. I think we've shared this with you a couple times before, but you know, it's a street that's got different characters, and particularly as it touches the park, it is a particularly already sort of a small scale and in not the best shape. So next slide, please. So you had a number of questions just about kind of how patterns work for travel here in Raleigh. So Raleigh is a little bit unique. If you think about how most center cities work, we've got a lot of trips that come and go to the job centers in downtown. Charlotte is a great example. Folks commute in and they commute out in the evenings. Raleigh is different in that we've got multiple major job centers. So you see a lot of travel that happens along the Beltline, a lot of travel that happens along 70 north and south. And we wanted to just use that as kind of some context setting for this particular slide. So what you're looking at here are traffic volumes that we see. These are 2019 counts, but they're the traffic volumes that we see in these major corridors that are in and around and feed into downtown, but also service Dix Park. And downtown Raleigh is at the upper right corner. And the yellow line that you see sort of bisecting the slide, that's I-40 as it kind of circulates around the bottom. And then you've got South Saunders Street, which is the north-south line that's that runs through the middle of things there. To my point about the commuter patterns, so just for an example, that 45,000 is a bidirectional. Don't be deceived by the arrows, but that's bidirectional travel. But about 40% of those trips are not stopping in downtown. They're continuing on through. So you get this pattern that goes from North Raleigh to South Raleigh and into Garner. That's a little bit different. If we focus here on Lakewheeler Road, you can sort of see that along the edge of the park. You can see south of I-40, we've got about 19,000 cars a day. And then again, remember, this is bidirectional. Between there and Centennial and Maywood, it goes up to about 21. And then you can see the volumes drop considerably. We drop down to around 7,300 cars a day. A couple of caveats on this. Just want to remind you that these are 2019 counts. And with COVID, we saw a very drastic decrease in the number of travel trips that we see in the area. That has rebounded some, but we're still seeing numbers that are, you know, anywhere between 5 and 10% less than what they had been in 2019. So that's what it carries. And I know you had questions about capacity. So Kate, next slide, please. So here's volume versus capacity numbers. And you can see that we've got a pretty robust network and capacity that's remaining in that network. So for example, South Saunders Street, carrying about 45,000 cars a day, has a capacity with a few minor improvements of upwards of 80,000 cars a day. We've also got to the east with Wilmington Street and Hammond, some pretty significant capacity availability there. But to our point, let's focus here on Lakewheeler. The only section here that we see that approaches capacity is this area that is south of I-40. It's sort of between Tryon Road and there. You see a lot of those trips come and peel off and go to 40 and head out to the park, or come along up to Centennial and then peel off into Centennial campus and over to NC State. That volume again drops considerably. And as we've talked before, when we go to this 2-lane divided section, we'll get capacity increases there of upwards of 20,000. So that's kind of how we measure out against the traffic volumes and versus our capacity limits. So next slide, please. You see this reflected in the street plan. Again, identified that those capacity needs were in that section of Lakewheeler Road right around I-40 and Centennial, but again, can be a more compact section and a more compatible section to the park north of Maywood. Next slide, please. And again, we've shared this slide with you once before, just to talk about how that cross section of a 2-lane divided, by the virtue of the fact that we're taking cars out of the turning movements, help that capacity increase. So again, we would get a capacity of upwards of 18 to 20,000 vehicles per day. So next slide, please. So it's always helpful. I'm a visual learner, and it's always helpful for me to sort of see examples. So if we want to see what that what a 4-lane divided would look like, we can look right outside our front door from Plaza and Play and look at that section of Lakewheeler Road, but also at Centennial Parkway. So you can see they're quite wide sections. They've got varying widths on medians, and they make it a little bit more difficult for those pedestrians and for the connections across the street that we are trying to engender here around this portion of Lakewheeler Road. On the left side of the slide, you can see 2 projects that we've completed recently. Sandy Forks Road, which is again a 2-lane divided section. That median has got green infrastructure. So it's handling the stormwater needs for the road, and that varies in width along the length of the project. To the top of that, you see Hillsborough Street. Again, went from a 4-lane section to this 2-lane divided section, a narrower median, but still is able to handle the traffic and find that balance that we're looking for between a really human environment and being able to actually handle cars. And just for everyone's reference, this isn't in the slides previously, but Hillsborough Street carries about 17,500 cars a day. So it's doing its job of moving vehicles along, but it's also creating a better environment and a better balance for pedestrians and cyclists. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dix Edge study. I'm going to turn that over to my colleagues in planning and development, and Pat Young and Matt Clem will take it from here.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, committee members. Pat Young, Director of Planning and Development. Very nice to virtually meet those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to work with so far. As you're, I think, well aware, the Dix Edge study has been going on for about 1.5 years. It's a small area plan intended on working closely with the community and our city community partners and city partners on looking at important issues that are affecting neighborhood change in the Dix Edge area. And that includes, of course, affordable housing, preservation and production of new affordable housing, land use and zoning changes that'll help facilitate neighborhood change in a way that's acceptable to everybody in the community, looking at transit investments. But one of the key areas that the Dix Edge study has focused on in engagement with the community is how the park will interface with the adjacent community. And part of that interface, of course, is looking very closely at the roadway design and approach to ensure that there's walkability and a safe and comfortable access for folks of all modes. So the cross section that you're going to see subsequently here was informed in close partnership with all the folks in this call by the Dix Edge process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Clem to talk a little more detail about that. Matt's our senior planner and project manager on this project.
Thanks, Patrick. And good morning, Mayor and members of the Leadership Committee. First, I will note on the previous slide that we are on schedule to deliver the draft recommendations of the study to council this spring. You can go to the next slide. Patrick covered this a bit, but I would like to reiterate that the community, that the streetscape planning for Lakewheeler Road and the recommendations for the 2-lane section was in part a product of a community engagement process that concluded in May of 2021. And the streetscape recommendation was preferred by over 75% of the public participants. So the streetscape design for Lakewheeler Road incorporates several key issues from the Dix Edge study. The streetscape is designed to encourage multimodal transportation, facilitating a safe, comfortable, and convenient access to the park and the surrounding area by people on foot, by bike, scooter, or skateboard. This is accomplished by the addition of sidewalks on both sides of the street, including a 10-foot wide sidewalk and a 12-foot wide bikeway on the park side that's shown on the left-hand side of the screen. The street design includes 1 vehicle travel lane in each direction, which will encourage motorists using Lakewheeler Road to drive more slowly compared to a larger multi-lane street section, and that makes the street safer for every user. Proposed the proposed streetscape is also intended to minimize impacts to the Fuller Heights neighborhood directly across the street. This is accomplished by utilizing the existing right-of-way and minimizing the need to expand the size of the street to the east. So we'll go on to the next slide. The committee also requested information on ongoing and recently approved developments in the area. And this map shows current development activity south and east of the park. So items 1 and 2 on the map are a development called Park City South and a recently rezoned property, the Hamel Drive development. That's number 2. Both have been recently approved zoning cases, which will permit mixed-use developments and buildings of up to 20 stories tall. Park City South, number 1 on the list, has also received administrative approval for an initial phase of work, which will include an 11-story mixed-use development. Item 3 is a pending rezoning of about an acre or so within the Fuller Heights neighborhood. The request will allow 3-story developments. Item 4 is a pending rezoning for the Baker roofing site, which will permit buildings of up to 20 stories tall if approved. These 2 pending rezoning requests still have several months of public process, and of course will appear before the Planning Commission, City Council before any decision is made on changing the zoning laws. Items 5 and 6 are south of 40. Those are 2 cases that approved small scale mixed use developments. And of course, item 7 includes all of the property of the downtown south rezoning. Initial subdivision plans have been filed for the area north and east of the South Saunders and I-440 interchange. So there's more information on these developments later. I'll hand it over back to Michael here in a second to cover kind of the traffic impact analysis of these projects.
And I'll just jump in. So we're not only looking at the traffic generated by the private development, we're also looking at the traffic generated by both the Play Plaza and also including Marbles in that discussion. And so with both entities estimated at 1 million visitors each, we've done a variety of studies with VHB to understand what would daily trips look like and what would the traffic demand then be on Lakewheeler Road. And so we're bringing all of that together. And Michael, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, we're so looking to the future. So that's the $64,000 question, right? That how do we handle all of this projected growth? So these numbers are reflecting some things that are projections and some things that are that we know that have come out of the traffic impact studies that we've got. So, for example, the first two projects, the Park City South and the Hamel projects, the 800 and 900 numbers come directly from their traffic impact analysis, and that's the trip distribution that's been allocated to Lakewheeler Road. Some of the other numbers, the Baker roofing, we had to take a number there that if we look at what their full build out would be, that 3,000 represents the number of trips generated at full build out. But if we take all of these and we add them all together and you look at this, you see that with a capacity of roughly 20,000 vehicles a day, our current trip count, we really only get to about 15,000 projected trips. That's in a way, it's a little misleading in that we look at this as being very additive, but as we've talked a little bit about, as we spoke about parking before, you know, when we talk about an amphitheater use happening mostly in the evening and those uses for Marbles, we know that there's some difference in time that these things happen. So Kate, next slide, please. So that demand we know varies. So the peak demand for parks and the peak demand for some of the traditional business hours and commuting hours are going to be different. So there's going to be some again, capacity gains that we feel that are going to be available and that the street will function as we see fit, as we think it's going to do that going forward. We also just let's remind folks the capacity that we put those numbers down, that looks at the maximum daily demand. And as I mentioned before, we've yet to see traffic recover from COVID like we thought it would. And so there's still a little bit more freeboard in that as well. Lastly, what we have been trying to do is balance the street design for that human environment that you want to see adjacent to the park, and with the access and connectivity that we have to be able to get people to the park and to some of these new developments and to downtown and to 40. So again, balance is the word we always try to strive for here and to make that work. And I think it's important that this cross section, as we see how it works there at Hillsborough Street, does achieve that. I want to take an aside here for just a second. I know that you, as the leadership committee, have all heard from one of our really impassioned citizens about alternatives that would be even more human-centric and park-centric. And we looked at a lot of that information that was shared, and a lot of that proposal actually rerouted some of this traffic down neighborhood and residential streets. And we don't think that fully achieves all the goals that we're looking at about how we mitigate impacts and create the best environment for everyone. We think we did hear a lot of that information, and we feel like what you're going to see in the street design and the streetscape design takes a lot of that information and tries to, again, create that balance, again, to find that best design that's going to be a good edge for the park and a good edge for Fuller Heights, and stitch those pieces together rather than create a gulf between the two of them. To that point, next slide, please. If we were to go with a wider section, I think most of us are familiar with this idea of induced demand, that if we make an easier path of travel along a desire line, that we widen the road, it's going to work very well for a while. But then it's going to fill up again, and it's going to take all that traffic that normally would have been using South Saunders Street to get into town, and it'll use the path of least resistance, because we know that traffic is like water and it's going to flow along that path of least resistance. And we would be creating a thoroughfare right again between Fuller Heights and the park edge, and that's less conducive and less, I would say, less successful of an impact. Less successful in an outcome for the park than we're trying to create, because again, we're trying to create this balance between a human-centric design and actually trying to manage the traffic flows and access needs that we have for that. So Kenneth Ritchie from Engineering Services Group is with us today, and he's going to walk us through the design and schedule for the work going forward. Kenneth.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Mayor and members of the committee. I'm Kenneth Ritchie, Roadway Design and Construction Manager with the Engineering Services Department, here to talk through the design and delivery process for the Lakewheeler Road project. As has been discussed throughout this presentation, the policy guidance from the street plan and the Dix Edge study have really helped kind of scope the guidance that we have provided to our design consultant STV engineers with regards to the design that we look to achieve through the delivery process. With that, it does look at a 2-lane divided street section with the separated bikeway pedestrian facilities on the park side and more residential scale sidewalk facilities on the Fuller Heights side. In addition, there have been some intersection treatment studies done along Lakewheeler to really try and identify what some of those intersection treatments are, most notably identifying potential roundabouts at Hamill Drive and Dal Adams Street that our design consultant will be looking at as they move forward with their design efforts that are currently under contract. Kate, next slide. Also with this design, there are some design considerations that we have to try and factor in. This is a very narrow corridor when we take into consideration not only the residential Fuller Heights side of Lakewheeler Road, but also when we factor in the existing Duke Energy transmission infrastructure and easement that is along the park frontage on the west side. We are going to be working with Duke to try and identify ways to complete the design, but certainly trying to maintain minimal impact on the Fuller Heights side, while still balancing trying to minimize the impact on the park side to the fullest extent possible. As has also been identified, we will be working with some of the identified development projects in terms of what our design is, how that factors into theirs, really pushing forth the pedestrian and the bicycle connectivity, not only along the corridor, but across the corridor from the residential side. And then, as we discussed previously, the integration of roundabouts to help move traffic and control traffic through this corridor. Next slide, Gabe. Thank you. So this is just some aerials that will identify the existing Lakewheeler Road. The red identifies the existing right-of-way for Lakewheeler, which today is approximately 54 feet. It also identifies in blue the 75-foot Duke Energy easement that exists today. That is an easement that we do have to factor in terms of maintaining that for Duke's purposes and for their access and maintenance of their facilities. The green identifies the current location of the transmission infrastructure as it relates to how it runs along Lakewheeler Road. Okay, next slide. So this kind of shows what the current proposal would look like. That's the Avenue 2-lane divided. This is what's informed by the street plan and the Dix Edge study, which is approximately an 85-foot wide right-of-way. We do hold the existing eastern right-of-way edge along Fuller Heights, and the right-of-way does come into the park with a relocation of the Duke Energy easement. With that too becomes a potential relocation of the Duke Energy infrastructure that we are working with the team at Duke Energy to identify exactly what those requirements will be. I think it's also important to identify that this only identifies some of the permanent property rights. There will be temporary property rights that will be needed on both sides to facilitate construction, but those are temporary and then would cease at the completion of the project. Okay, next slide. And I know that there has been some conversations and questions regarding a 4-lane section for Lakewheeler Road. Certainly, as has been highlighted, that is not a recommended section. The volume projections would lend to a potential overbuild of the corridor. There are significant impacts to the residential character and the residential properties along this corridor. With this additional, with the 109 foot of right-of-way, which is approximately 24 feet wider than the 2-lane section, we would have to look at symmetrically placing that right-of-way along the existing right-of-way, which, as you can see from the aerials and from the overlay, has a significant impact on the residential housing along the eastern side of Lakewheeler Road. And then too, the project cost of the additional pavement and the wider right-of-way, the acquisition cost certainly would be well beyond what has been anticipated for this project. Okay, next slide. So another question that has been raised is with regards to the delivery method and design build in particular. So what is design build? It's a method of project delivery where one entity, the design build team, would work under a single contract with the owner to provide design and construction services. Certainly there are instances where this is a very beneficial method of project delivery. For this particular instance, this process was not a viable option for this project. One, because full project funding is not yet in place. City Council did reappropriate funding in the summer of 2021, about 1.5 million to facilitate the design. But to this point, we have not yet, the full funding for the project is not available and thus would not be available for this type of contract. And then two, given the state of the Dix Edge study and some of the other studies that were ongoing, trying to move into a design build relationship at the time that we would have had to do it posed significant risk, that posed significant cost risk because of some of the variability and flexibility of what the design may ultimately be. Okay, next slide. And so now to talk a little bit about the project schedule for Lakewheeler Road. We are looking at an 18-month kind of design to construction commencement process that has commenced and does look at construction commencing in the summer of 2023. We have projected to date a 2-year construction, which would have us completing in the summer of 2025. There would be a year from the opening of the Play Plaza to the completion of Lakewheeler Road that certainly we will on the next slide kind of talk through access considerations during that time. Also to highlight is some of the public engagement milestones of this delivery process. There was a pre-design engagement period in the fall of 2021 that really sought to reiterate to the public the scope guidance coming from the Dix Edge study and the street plan, as well as highlighting some of the intersection treatments, most notably the roundabouts. We will be doing an update to council later this winter. And then as we go through, there will be a design public engagement in the summer as we get a design a little bit more implemented and start looking at some of the preliminary property impacts. We will go back out to the public to start those conversations. We will do a city council project presentation in the fall of this year. This will be the point at which we will ask council to authorize the project for condemnation, and that will be the kickoff for our real estate effort on this. And then certainly looking at a pre-construction engagement prior to construction starting the summer of 2023. During this time, there will also be extensive coordination as we bring the contractor on board with regards to construction phasing, access considerations, both for the residential east side of Lakewheeler as well as for the park. Kate, if you can go to the next slide. And with that, discussing access and circulation during construction, certainly we will through the construction corridor be seeking to maintain access for the residential property owners during this process, which also in itself will work in continued access to the park. But notably too, there are a number of other access points and access means to the park that will not be impacted by the project delivery itself. But certainly we will be working with the public and with this group to identify and work through construction logistics as we move forward with the delivery process. And that is all that we have. We'll certainly open to any questions.
Well, we warned you that today's meeting was going to be very intense, so lots of information to absorb. I wanted to ask if anybody has any questions of staff on Lakewheeler Road. Nancy?
Nancy, you're muted.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Thanks for all the work you've done. I certainly appreciate it. The only thing I would say is that you talk a lot in the road design about frontage to the residential and single family homes. And if you look at those properties basically last time I looked, have been bought up in chunks. So I'm assuming they're all going to come for rezoning. And we'll be looking at least 1 million square feet of property there. I think the chance of those single family homes saying little single family homes is very slight. So have you looked at a road design that looks at that projection? Because it certainly seems to be the way we're going with all these large rezonings. That's what I'm worried about. And the other thing is we talk about roundabouts that often makes it difficult for pedestrian crossings.
Yeah, I think you've asked questions that are maybe for two different staff. So I'll try to address them at a high level and then see if there's additional detail there.
Okay.
I think it's difficult to anticipate future development. I think in the information that Michael showed, there still is capacity remaining. I think we've been very conservative in the assumptions. And so I think there is a capacity remaining in the design. And so certainly we can't anticipate the future changes in that neighborhood. I also think that, and I think I can look to planning to confirm this. I think the Dix Edge study, while certainly wanted to respect those individuals in the properties immediately adjacent to Lakewheeler, I think some of the focus was the larger Fuller Heights neighborhood. and access for the adjacent neighborhood. So when we talk about keeping the park accessible to the adjacent neighborhoods, I don't think we mean just specifically those direct homes along Lakewheeler. We're talking about pedestrian access more broadly. And then the question about roundabouts, I mean, Kenneth certainly showed a depiction there, but there'll be a long design process, lots of feedback and refining that design and opportunities for both this group and the community provide feedback on the advantages and disadvantages of roundabouts. And there's never, Kenneth would say there's never a project where there aren't robust conversations about the pros and cons of roundabouts. I think I maybe hit all of your questions. Staff, if I misspoke or if there's anything additional, I'm just trying to be efficient with remaining time.
I will just agree with what you said there, Tansy. And Madam Mayor, if I may just add, Michael talked about the street plan, which is our policy document that guides the ultimate built out street sections and has been planning for that 2-lane section on Lakewheeler for some time. Our street plan and our transportation planning is largely informed by regional metropolitan scale projections. So the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is organized by Campo, our regional MPO, we input data and projections into that model. And that is based on not existing development, not even entitled development, but what is planned for in the long range 2030 comprehensive plan. So the ultimate development pattern that we are anticipating being built and fulfilled over the next generation. And that includes projections for high density residential uses along Lakewheeler Road, which is what is currently mapped in the plan. And the areas of downtown being our central business district and much of the Dix Edge area as another regional growth area. So just to say, those street sections are informed by long range thinking and modeling for a build out many years into the future.
Nancy, if I can just add to that, I happened to ask Chris Lucasina over at Campo, and he provided me the 2050 long-range projections, and 2050 projects Lakewheeler at about 17,400 cars a day. So still
Mayor,
within our capacity projections.
Matt, I think you might have had your hand up too.
I did. This program's so high tech. I raised my hand and it made a little automatic hand. So I don't know what else it's doing for me, but I can't tell. Anyway, Michael, and your staff and everyone, I mean, that was such a great presentation. I thought for the head traffic engineer to bring up the dirty secret of traffic planning induced demand. I was so pleased to see that. It's sort of like the chapter they like to cut off the end of the old textbooks and throw away because they don't want anybody to know about that, right? It's like, whoa, I remember finally learning about that. I'm like, how the hell isn't this the first thing you learn about? If you make the road wide, you'll get tons of traffic on it, guys. And if you want to think about making this into a 4-lane road, just go take a little stroll down Centennial Parkway is all I could say. And tell me you want that in front of this park that we're trying to make with pedestrian access here. I think you'll quickly realize that that's a bad idea. So from a park, so of course I'm putting aside the numbers in a certain sense, but with an understanding of them and saying from a park design, humanity, noise, speed, danger, everything perspective, we absolutely don't want more than 2 lanes in front of this road, in the front of this park. Just think about the sound of the traffic that a 4-lane road would have it over the sound of the traffic on the 2-lane road, just the speed difference in the sound, much less everything else. And so really, it's about creating a humane space here. From my perspective, this is my opinion, but an informed opinion. I think we have the capacity And God, you know, if there's a little bit of backup on some giant theater night we have or something like that, and there's a couple of guys out there having to direct traffic, which is not what these guys are saying, by the way, but I'm just musing, that would be fine. Okay, a couple of nights a year. Okay, so let's keep it narrow, in my opinion. That's my vote. Mr. Goodman.
I was waiting for Jim to pop on here.
Hey, so I'm not on the 4-lane part, but we need this open when we open the park. And I mean, I understand and appreciate the way you do your traffic project. I got that. That was a great presentation. What, isn't there any way to accelerate a project? I'm not, so we have this wonderful park and we'll say, oh, we'll figure out how to route you around to get you in there. That's really disappointing. So the question is it possible to get it open on time, and what would that cost? Right? If somebody said, okay, you got to have this open on time. Have you got a good track record on meeting are you pretty sure about the 25?
Yeah, so I'll defer to Kenneth Ritchie on here, who is our expert here. Yeah, a little bit of the challenge on schedule is we don't have a design. So design informs a lot about the schedule once we have construction documents. And I think I've said a number of times, and we'll continue to say it, staff understands the urgency here and will work as quickly as we can through design, right-of-way, contracting, coordination with Duke in terms of designing and implementing changes to the utility transmission lines. And no, we do not see any circumstance, given the lead time on all of that activity, where the project will be complete and ahead of Lakewheeler Road. In terms of the level of certainty on this project timeline, I'll allow Kenneth to speak to. I think we've tried to be realistic. Certainly, though, you know, he's got limited information about the true impacts of the design and construction to have a real detailed schedule. So Kenneth, I'll turn it to you to share any additional detail.
So I think Tansy covered it pretty well. Obviously, we're trying to find every avenue we can to expedite the delivery of this project. Obviously, some of the design considerations, most notably the coordination with Duke, are going to drive some of that timeline. We're trying to work closely with them to minimize what that impact is, and certainly they're open to the conversations. But I don't, as fast as we're trying to move, I don't think there's any way that we can get that this project will be done and constructed by the time the park opens.
Right, I got that. I understand that. My question is, how much money would it take to get it open on time? I mean, is that what you have?
Yeah, I'll just be frank. It's not a question of money. It's a question of tasks and feasibility. And so I appreciate the question, and ultimately the park just has a considerable lead in terms of the design work that's happened, the contracting and work that's happened for this project to catch up.
So the answer is no. I got it. All right.
Yeah, yes, the answer is no.
Yeah.
I just have a follow-up to that. So this road won't be done. So what will be the plan for getting people in and out of this park? And, you know, where are they going to go? And I mean, all of that, especially if Marbles is located right there on Lakewheeler Road, that's going to be people's natural tendency to want to come in right there. So what's the backup plan?
So I can jump in, and I think Kenneth one of the things that we keep talking about is how we will manage access to the park during the construction of Lakewheeler Road. And so there are 5 other entries to the park. It's going to take work and signage and communications and everything else, but we do it. We do it on a, on an event scale now, and we will do it on a construction scale when both Play Plaza is under construction and when the road goes under construction. And so, Kenneth, I don't know if you would add anything to that, but we will be able to get people there. It just might take them 2 to 3 minutes longer.
And certainly Kate hit on it. We've got the other access points, but certainly there will be extensive coordination between the Play Plaza and the park and the construction project as we move this forward to ensure that we've got that accessibility to the project to the park during construction.
Jen?
I just wanted to say, I think it'll just be critical to have great communication when the playground opens, to be sure to just have signage that says, don't worry, great things are coming soon. And, when the construction's happening, say this is temporary, and because people are creatures of habit and we don't want them to get used to coming in the back way, but just great signage.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Okay, we are beyond our time, but I did want to give Janet an opportunity to just do a Dix Park Conservancy update.
Mayor, the Conservancy can hold our report for next month's meeting for the sake of
Okay.
time.
All right, thank you. I'm going to bypass the around the table discussion this time. If there's any questions or concerns, please follow up with Kate and we can get that on the next agenda. And I want to thank everybody from staff for being here today, all of you for being here. As I said, that was a lot of information to absorb. And I want to thank everybody for the hard work that went into this. And as such, I am going to adjourn the meeting, and we'll see you all next time, hopefully in person.